Episode 18 of the New England Sports Media Podcast coming at you now with Howard Herman, sports reporter, columnist for the Berkshire Eagle, and longtime Western Mass sports reporter. Howard, thanks for joining us, and how you doing?
Doing good. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here.
No doubt. So obviously, out in the Berkshires at the Eagle, you've been there for almost all of, if not the majority of your career. So can you just kind of take us through what positions you've been there and kind of your trajectory at the Eagle?
I started here when the paper initially, ironically, I have now started the Sunday paper and ended the Sunday paper because we decided about 3 weeks ago to stop publishing on Sundays due to the situation from the pandemic. But the paper wanted to go 7 days. They said they needed an extra reporter. I was working for a PR company in town after having spent the first 11, 12 years of my career in radio. And they said, would you like to come aboard? I said, sure. And I've been here ever since. Started doing the high school sports that nobody else wanted. I was the softball guy, the swimming guy, the alpine skiing guy, the extra high school football guy, which meant I got most of the bad games. But eventually, people I worked with in sports, I was with 3 other reporters, all of whom eventually moved over to news. So I gradually moved up the ladder, and by I think within 5 years, I was like the senior man as far as what everybody was doing. I was covering, I was basketball guy and high school, football guy and pro baseball guy in the summer. We used to have a minor league team in Pittsfield. So, and it went from there. And at one point I was writing a column based on my sports, which was baseball in the summer and first hockey, then basketball in the winter. Eventually that just became every week and whatever I wanted to write about. So, and that's where we are today. Currently, because of between the pandemic and the fact that there are no sports, there are only 2 of us in our sports department. And my editor and I just spend most of my days writing stories. And that's where we are right now.
So for high school sports, what would you say is the following like over there in Western Mass? Because around Boston, I mean, obviously we have a lot more going on, so the high school sports following isn't as big.
I think high school sports following in Boston is probably a little bigger than a lot of people think it is, especially, because I know the job that Danny Ventura and the guys at the Herald do. I mean, they crush high school sports. And I know that the young guys who work at the Globe have also done a great job, covering stuff. But it's our lifeblood. We granted, the big papers, you have the pro teams that are first. For us, the high school teams are first. We're at during the court. If this was a normal fall, we would be at every high school football game that our high schools play. Not every high school in our coverage area plays football, but we would be at every game. And if we weren't at a game, we have developed over the years relationships with newspapers in Northampton and Greenfield to cover games when our teams are in their areas, and we'll cover games for them when their teams are in our areas. So we don't have, so we aren't stretched quite as thin as we might otherwise be. But it's, our biggest days of the year are like Western Mass Basketball Championship Day. We usually have like 3 or 4 teams. So it'll be all hands on deck, full photographic, coverage. And it's what we get, we don't get the, God, you hate the Celtics stuff, in our texts and our emails. We get, why do you hate our high school? And we get that all the time from different schools saying, and I live by by what Joe Buck used to put on his Twitter bio. He says, I love every team except yours. and that's kind of the way, and that I don't hate any team. I did not grow up here, so I don't have a particular, one of my two children graduated from Pittsfield High School. The other one went to Gann Academy, which is a Jewish high school out in Waltham. So, I don't, if my kid went there, I didn't, I don't care.
Now, how's this fall been like for you? Obviously, there's less sports going on. So, how are you spending your days? What type of stories are you trying to report on? What's kind of like a week in the life like this fall?
My fall has been just like my spring and just like my summer. Although I did change the area that I work in. Once the pandemic hit and everything was shut down, I was working out of the kitchen. Just because I was working out of the kitchen, my wife was working out of the dining room. It was about 2.5 months ago, maybe 3 months ago. We had an old desk that we used to keep in the living room in our first house because it was where the computer was, and we didn't have a basement that was habitable for people just to hang out in there. It was a little more just like a laundry room. So she said, why don't we just bring the desk in and you can sit in the den and use it. And so for the last 3 months, I've been down in the den. I get up every morning, the coffee gets made. I wander on the computer thinking of ideas. I've got, and I just spend the day calling people and, writing stories. Occasionally we'll get out and cover stuff. I have covered maybe a half a dozen different golf tournaments this summer. We've had high school age kids playing Babe Ruth sports in baseball. We did that. We did a few games there. We actually this fall have 5 high schools playing golf in the regular MIAA schedule and 4 schools running cross country. And Saturday I get to go cover cross country. So other than that, and of course, something Greg and I did on Saturday, we both sat in our either dens or living rooms and covered a football game remotely. So I've done a little bit of that.
How'd you guys like that experience covering remotely? Is it something you're interested in doing for the foreseeable future? Or what was it like?
I think it's something we'll see for the foreseeable future for if you're covering major colleges and pros. I texted one of the media relations people at UMass who has not responded because most of them are now on furlough. And I tweeted him, I said, I discovered the best thing about covering a game from home. There is no line at the men's room. But
No free food either.
I had food. My son came over and brought pizza. So we had food. But I much prefer being there than watching it on TV to cover it. Although I do think that, and I don't know, Greg, if you saw it any different, listening to the broadcasters kind of colored my view a little of the game. Mm-hmm. And I had to stop and think twice before, I actually wrote something, on my pad that they said.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It was like there's some stuff that they just said that was kind of funny, and it was like, really, like who knew about this? Who knew about that? Like when they're talking about all the big time recruits up in Maine, there aren't any big time recruits up in Maine. I can tell you that.
There aren't that many there are far fewer big time recruits in Massachusetts than people think too. There's really good football in Massachusetts, but there aren't a lot, but the number of guys that go to, go to the big schools like BC or even UMass, it is pretty small. The funniest thing I saw was a picture yesterday of Tom Brady from the Bucks Packers game talking to offensive lineman John Runyon of the Packers, who I guess told him, you played with my dad, because I guess they both were at Michigan at the same time. So I wonder how that felt to be playing against somebody's kid.
And for covering
which is something I find I do a lot of covering of people's kids, kids I covered, and now I'm covering the kids of their kids, or their,
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that. Like, how has it changed? Obviously, it's a lot different this summer, but how has covering high school sports changed over the course of your tenure there?
That's an interesting, to me, it doesn't change a lot because I try to do it the same way. It's about the kids, and granted, I think some kids at some schools are hipper to media because they're probably on Instagram and TikTok and all of that. So they know things. Some coaches don't. I think some coaches don't get what we do, and they aren't. You have to train them to learn how to be cooperative, or to give you what you need. The one thing I won't do is I talk to coaches, and I never put a quote in a story where a coach said we weren't prepared. Or said they tried harder than we did. Kids tried hard; they just may not have been as good. So that's the way that's kind of the way I look at it. I'm with high school kids. I'm always a glass is half full guy rather than a glass is half empty guy, because I don't think you necessarily need to, really beat up on a 15-year-old, who committed a personal foul, and, with 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter that might have cost his team a game.
And covering these sports now, are you on? I see you have a pretty active Twitter page. Like, are you on Instagram? Are you on TikTok? Are you interested in those things?
I do a little bit of Instagram. I don't do TikTok. I do a lot of, I had an old sports editor who now works in the news business at the cable news channel over in Albany, and he was very much, he pounded a lot about social media, get online, get stuff out there. And when it comes to Twitter, I've been very careful this fall. I try to stay away from snarky political stuff because I have people on both sides of this, and I get some really, and I read some really, really awful stuff, but I enjoy being on Twitter, particularly during games, and particularly talking to, engaging people during games on Twitter. There are there are a lot of people, and it mainly happens when I'm covering UMass, because that's a very, very active Twitter community, and and sometimes it's fun. I can remember covering games last year when people just wanted to have shoot the starting quarterback to the moon, and we would tweet, and the other writer would just say, yeah, he's not that good, but you have bigger problems than Andrew Brito. And sometimes they didn't get that. Sometimes they did, but that's the best part of being on Twitter, is being on during a game and being able to, communicate with people who are fans.
So can you explain a little bit about kind of the Berkshire Eagle? They were bought by local ownership, correct? And things kind of changed. Can you kind of explain what that situation like kind of played into your role, or how that affected your role, or just in general what it was like?
Sure. We'll go way back. When I was initially hired, we were owned by the Miller family, and the Millers had owned the paper for almost a century. They bought a building, a very large old mill building in just off of the main downtown. Moved us there, thought that it might help, buffer problems with the newspaper business by being in real estate. There was a real estate crash. They lost money. They sold to William Dean Singleton, who was at the time the owner of the Denver Post, ran the original media news group. It came, and I used to tell people, said, it wasn't great, but he was a guy who wanted a great paper at a low cost. I know too many other owners, media owners, who don't even care how good they were. Eventually, Media News Group and Journal Register merged to form the new Media News Group, and they're owned by a hedge fund, and all they want to do is, make profit for their shareholders and don't really care about their product. So we were part of them for a long time. We were arguably the most profitable entity they had in the Northeast. And so we didn't get cuts as much, but we didn't get people replacing. Eventually, we lost our desk to New Haven, Connecticut. They very much believe in regional hubs for production. So then about 4 years ago, a retired judge and some friends of his and some guys he knew, one was a retired newspaper publisher, a couple guys were, big money guys, got together and said, we want to restore the Berkshire Eagle to what it was when it won a Pulitzer Prize for editorials back in the 70s. So they bought New England newspapers, which was our paper in Pittsfield, the Bennington Banner, the Brattleboro Reformer, and the Weekly Manchester Journal in Vermont. So by buying us, then they had to hire like a squadron of people because we didn't have any desk people. So they hired a whole brand new desk and we hired a couple more reporters, and then we're cruising along until the pandemic hit. And then when the pandemic hit, we all took furlough weeks and survived it. But at one point they said, it's really crushed us. And and anybody else watching this can probably go online and find the articles that that our publisher talked about, what they did. So we stopped publishing on Sundays and Mondays. Our Saturday paper is now our Sunday paper. In print, we still do, like my game story from Saturday showed up online on Sunday, Saturday night. And on Monday, we run a very large e-edition, which looks just like our paper, except it's just on your computer screen or on your tablet. And that's where we are right now.
And what about like the sports department specifically? You said it's 2 people. Was it more? Was it less? Has it always been 2?
We have been a 4-man department we've either been 3 or 4. We've been 4 again for about 15 years. We went down to 2, and the other 2 reporters moved over to news because we didn't have anything to cover. We didn't need 4 guys. Between my editor and myself, we could write enough stuff and still have 2 days off, our 2 days off during the week, because there wasn't anything to cover. So we didn't need 3 guys to cover, high school baseball on a Friday afternoon. We didn't need, a guy in Pittsfield to cover the summer college league team, or the same day a guy in North Adams to cover that summer college league team. So we've been down, I suspect, and nobody's said anything, but I assume that if there is full sports in the winter, we'll be full again. But nobody's said anything, but because nobody knows if there's going to be sports, we may even find that out tomorrow, because I think the MIAA's tournament management committee is going to talk about winter sports a little in their schedule.
And you said too that you guys were one of the more profitable within the company, like 4 or 5 years ago. For kind of a smaller newspaper, like what separates you guys? Like, how can a newspaper separate themselves within that conglomerate?
Well, we did our job really well. I mean, we are, the advantage we have in some respects is that we are the main news source. And I'm sure, where Greg is now, you probably don't get hit a lot by a lot of TV guys like in Boston or in Springfield or even in Worcester. You are the main media source, news source. We have a couple of radio stations that have pretty much abrogated they pretty much read our paper in the morning, in morning drive. And there's a website that does some stuff, but they are pretty hyper local to a particular corner of our county. But we go, from Vermont to Maine, Vermont to Connecticut, New York State to Springfield. That's our coverage area. And we have bureaus in North Adams and Great Barrington, and we're the guys that that people have to turn to, because there isn't really, without us, there's a news desert.
What's your paper been focused on kind of as a whole recently? Is it mostly local election stuff, or?
Local election stuff. It's pandemic stuff. We have, we do a lot of everything. We have a city hall reporter who just basically covers city hall and the school and the school committee in Pittsfield. We have not yet replaced a courts reporter, which we used to have, but that's because we have enough people elsewhere, who can plug in, and there aren't that many, in-person trials right now. Everybody's doing all their legal maneuvering, on Zoom calls like this one. We have an investigations editor who works really, really hard, and we had about 2.5 years ago, there's a big controversy about the Berkshire Museum selling a lot of art that it wasn't displaying, but it wanted to build up its financial reservoirs and its endowment. And it was a big story. It got to be a huge story in the community, and our people broke it, and we do everything. We are much like we're like the Globe, except much smaller.
For sure. Now, how about in terms of like what you balance high schools, colleges? Like, are you covering mostly every UMass basketball game, football game? Is it just kind of up to you? Like, do you consider yourself a UMass beat reporter? Like, are there any other colleges you cover? I know Albany's not that far away. Like, is there anything else you guys do?
Yeah, I split my time between whatever high school stuff I need to do between UMass and Williams College. I'm the Williams College beat guy. I have traveled with them to like 6 or 7 Division III Final Fours. I travel myself. I didn't travel, would have liked to have traveled with them, but because that 10-hour car ride to Salem, Virginia can be a little bit tricky. But I've always tried, I've always said, if it's a big high school week, you got me there, and I'll, and the other stuff will be secondary. When it comes to UMass, that's what it is more. That's why, I'll do football and basketball, but I don't do any hockey there, because hockey's a Friday night sport, and Friday night in a normal year is high school basketball night. So we're all really busy on Friday nights, but that's pretty much how I divide my time. And in my summer, I divide my time up between 2 summer college wood bat league teams and the Red Sox. And I'll go to maybe a dozen or 24 Red Sox games over the course of 162, just to I'll actually cover the opener, and then I'll go and try to get stuff for my Sunday column, or now my Saturday column.
Right on. So Williams College has gotten a lot of press lately because of Duncan Robinson. Did you cover him at all when he was there, and what was he like?
I did. It's a funny story. I knew who Duncan Robinson was before he started playing at Williams, because he played AAU basketball for Middlesex Magic, which is run by Mike Crotty Jr. And at the time was run by his dad. Mike Crotty Jr. played at Williams. So I knew Mike played on the national championship team there. But my nephew, who was a point guard at Newton North, was also on that. Had also played for the Magic before Duncan was there. And every Thanksgiving, and at Thanksgiving, I said, "What do you know about this Robinson kid?" Said, "He can play." And I did something. I wrote a story last week because Tim Layden from NBC Sports, who is another Williams graduate and played basketball in the old days when they played in their old gym, tweeted something about, after Robinson went 27-7 or 23-7, whatever that was in Game 5, had that big game. Said, and there are probably guys from Colby and Middlebury sitting there drinking their IPAs saying, "I shut him down." And I went back, and it made me laugh. So I went back and looked. And actually, Colby didn't shut him down specifically. He was, and I only know this because I looked it all up. I think he was like 8 for 8 from the floor, 3 from 3 from 3-point range, 6 for 6 from the free throw line, 29 points in that game. So I wrote a story about that and said, who shut him down? What was his year like? The 1 year he played at Williams, he started, I think, 30 games out of 32. So, and to be a freshman starting, even at that level of Division III, is not easy. Second leading scorer on a 5-player who scored in double figures team. If you all can Google the national, go on YouTube. You can see the end of how Williams lost the national championship his freshman year, when a guy named Quadrell Young from Wisconsin Whitewater got the in inbounds with like 4 seconds left and went all Tyus Edney, Danny Ainge on them and took it right back down and scored. And Robinson said in the post-game press conference, because in those, at national championships, even in the Division III, podium, reporters, microphones, just like it is, in the Division I Final Four. I had asked, I said, what, because he had missed a shot, and Mike Mayer, who was Williams' 6'10" center, tipped and was a first-team All-American, tipped it back in to put them up. And I said, "What'd you think when Mike, tipped that shot in?" And Duncan said, "I thought we won the national championship." And tremendous player. He would not have left Williams had his coach, Mike Maker, not left to take a Division I job at Marist. And if he stays at Williams, they probably win a couple of national titles. He spends like 3 or 4 years over in Lithuania or someplace, getting pretty good money playing basketball. And then he's working on Wall Street. Instead, he goes, he transfers to Michigan, which was where, Coach Maker worked for Coach Beeline at West Virginia. So there was a connection. They run that basically the same Princeton style offense. And if he does, and so he goes there, and even as good as he was at Michigan, and he was pretty good at Michigan, I'm not sure anybody could have, foreseen him doing what he has done with the Miami Heat.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that. It sounds like it was pretty unexpected and pretty unheralded for sure. He should have, maybe he'd be playing with the Red Claws up here, but not a likely scenario, but pretty cool to hear that. Howard, yeah. Go ahead.
He was playing for the Miami G League team out in South Dakota. Yeah. So I think he played like 20 or 20. I think he got called up 20 times or so. Easy for the G League, easy for the Red Claws guys to get to Boston. Not so easy to get from Sioux Falls, South Dakota to South Beach.
Absolutely. Guys, frequent flyer miles. Well, Howard, we thank you for your time. That was a lot of fun, and we really appreciate it.
My pleasure anytime, guys. Thank you.
Cool.